Ok, bonjour, bonjour, bienvenue. Aujourd'hui, c'est le jeudi 4 février. So here we've got the same objectives as we did yesterday. And today, we're really going to work on ER verbs. I don't have an échauffement planned, but we can just kind of warm up by checking in and seeing how things are going. And maybe I'll send out a poll. So again, we're kind of working on verbs right now. So I'd love to hear, and I'll go ahead and set up a poll. How are you feeling about these ER verbs on a scale of 1 to 7? So I'll set up a poll. Okay, awesome. A lot of people express generally that they're kind of halfway through, that they feel like they're slowly getting to mastery, but they're really, really not there yet. And that's great. If I gave you a scale from 1 to 7, and most people were 3, 4, 5, and one person was even 6, which is great. I would expect you at the end of this week to be at a 4 or maybe a 5. That would be really, really great. But that's about it. I'm not expecting mastery here. I'm really just trying to introduce you to these verbs so you get familiar with them. And I'll explain myself in a moment, actually, exactly what I'm trying to do. So today in class, I'd mostly like us to do a little practice with ER verbs, and I'll kind of explain what I'd like to do for the end of this unit, because we're going to end this unit today and tomorrow, so that you know kind of what we're doing. All right, so who can give me some ER verbs? And I'll put some out there in a moment. But I just wanted to see, what do you remember? Because I've shown you this screen quite a few times now. What are some ER verbs that you remember? I gave you some in the poll just now. So go ahead and put them in the chat, or you can say them out loud, whatever you prefer. 3 of them to use as practice. I want to encourage you to use 3 of these ER verbs as practice to kind of latch onto verbs that you think you'd like to use. And I told you I like to eat, so I used manger as an example. Or maybe I do like to cook as well. So maybe I'd use cuisiner. Like, oh, I want to practice cuisiner because I know I'll be using that when speaking in French. But there are lots of verbs to choose from, and I'll show you in a moment. So here's that list that I've given you the past few days. And after seeing it so many times, hopefully you're starting to really recognize them. And a few of them are kind of coming to you a little more clearly. So there's parler, parler, je parle. Travailler, travailler, donc on travaille, hein, on travaille, working. Étudier, on étudie le français dans ce cours. Étudier. Peut-être tu étudies les mathématiques. Hein. Aimer. Peut-être tu aimes les mathématiques. J'aime les mathématiques. Je ne sais pas. J'aime le français. Pourquoi pas. Penser. Je pense. Et je pense donc je suis. I think therefore I am. De Descartes. Je pense donc je suis. Danser. Donc danser sur TikTok, quelque chose. Chercher. Si on cherche bien. Jouer, donc jouer au football, jouer aux jeux vidéo, je ne sais pas, jouer aux cartes, manger, j'aime manger, voyager, j'aime voyager. Est-ce que tu aimes voyager? Et je vais mettre dans le chat. Où est-ce que tu as voyagé? Moi, j'ai voyagé en France, en Angleterre et un peu au Maroc et un peu en Espagne et en Suède. J'ai voyagé un peu en Californie et dans la Louisiane. Et toi, est-ce que tu as voyagé? Où est-ce que tu as voyagé? Où est-ce que tu as voyagé? So go ahead and you can answer that in the chat when you feel like it. Voyager. Donner. Je te donne une question. Je te donne une note. Je te donne des mots de vocabulaire. I'm giving you vocabulary words. Je te donne des mots de vocabulaire. Commencer. On vient de commencer le cours. We just started the class. On a commencé le cours. Porter. Donc, je porte un polo, un collier, des lunettes, un anneau. Je porte un anneau. Trouver. Ah, j'ai trouvé. Je cherche de l'eau. Ah, ça y est, j'ai trouvé. J'ai trouvé de l'eau. Habiter. J'habite à Madison. Et toi, tu habites à Verona, j'imagine. Ou peut-être tu habites à Fitchburg. OK. Donc, où est-ce que tu as voyagé? All right, excellent. So I hope you've picked out 3 verbs that you're really interested in. So for today, what I'd like to do is to spend a little time working on this stuff. And so this is the activity, verb ER01, and a few people have already completed it, which is great. I changed the due date so that it's due tomorrow at midnight. I'd like to give you a little extra time to do it because what I'd like is for you to do this first. And what this is we started this yesterday. It's a practice activity where you choose the correct conjugation of the verb from the dropdown. Now, the idea of this is you're practicing those patterns. You're practicing the patterns. How does the verb end based on the subject? So again, when we're conjugating verbs, we're looking at, okay, this verb for which subject, okay? So we take a verb like porter, je porte, tu portes, on porte, nous portons, vous portez, elle porte, okay? And we're gonna spell it differently. And I'm gonna talk to you in a moment about why we do that in French and why it's important to practice this. So I'd love for you to take a moment to go ahead and do this activity. I'll set a small timer. And then once you're done with that, I would love for you to go ahead and complete this activity where you're choosing 3 ER verbs from the list that I've given you, and you're conjugating one of them here, one of them here, and one of them here. And you're just using the je form, okay? Right. So what I'd like to do is we'll take 3 or 4, let's do 5 minutes. Let's do 5 minutes for you to complete the different steps of this activity. And I'll check in with y'all and I'll ask you to, let's see, I'll put it in the chat. I'll ask you to give me a signal when you're done with different parts of the activity, okay? And if you've already completed all of it, what I would recommend is going through and checking through your activity packet and trying to complete the activities in that. And if you've already done all that, then you can chill for the next 5 minutes. But I think quite a few people still need to do these. So let's take 5 minutes and I'll tell you in the chat what I'd like you to do for signals. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and go over this activity. These are, I don't know why it's giving answers in here, because these are not answers. So we'll go ahead and go over this activity and then I'll explain a little bit what I'd like you to do with the second activity if you haven't already done it. And then I'd like to talk about verbs in French in general, because it's unique, all right? So here, choisir la forme qui convient. And one of the reasons I like this activity, and I'm glad to share this website with you, is
Tu aimes les fêtes.
You've got pronunciation, right? So if you listen,
Tu aimes les fêtes.
These are all possible answers, right? Tu aimes, tu aimes, tu aimes. But we want the one with the S on the end. A lot of times in French conjugations, tu ends with S. The tu form ends with an S. Here,
Elle n'aime pas les oranges.
Elle n'aime pas les oranges. We've got good pronunciation. Again, any of these are possible answers. It's going to be this first one. Elle n'aime pas les oranges. Here, this is where it gets a little frustrating with French, right?
Elle n'aime pas les oranges.
Elle n'aime pas les oranges. Exact same pronunciation. And yet, what's different? What's different between these two? Can somebody tell me in the chat or out loud? It sounds exactly the same, right? But these are actually pretty different in meaning. Yeah, exactly. Two, it's one person. So for number two, it's Madame Perez, we'll say, okay? We'll say Madame Perez doesn't like oranges. Elle n'aime pas les oranges, all right? But here it's Madame Perez, Madame Rogers, and Madame DiMartoni, these three colleagues of mine. Elle n'aime pas les oranges. Same pronunciation, but different spelling. And that's where French gets really frustrating for folks, and English too, because English has the same struggle, where it's spelled differently, but it's pronounced the same. It's really weird. So it's just something to kind of get used to and something to recognize, like, okay, there's this pattern that can be a little bit frustrating, and the sooner we can kind of come to terms with that, the sooner we can learn to work with it. So here, same thing.
Il chante aussi.
Il chante aussi. Again, sounds like all three of these, but this is going to be the correct one. Same thing here.
Il chante aussi.
Right? Same pronunciation, but different spelling because it's plural. All right, so the plural. And a lot of times I hear folks in class, again, I don't hear your voices very much because we're on Zoom, but in class a lot of times I'll hear students pronounce this, il chante, il chantant, chantant. And it's tempting and I get it, but there's actually no difference in the pronunciation. Okay, il chante, il chante. All right, je déjeune, I have lunch. Elle entre, elle pense. So again, it's plural, so that's going to be the ENT. Elle pense, singular. Tu penses, with that S on the end. So oftentimes the tu form is going to have an S on the end, not just with the ER verbs, but more generally too. Je pense à toi, I'm thinking about you. Il remonte, il remonte, again, ENT because it's plural. Tu ne regardes pas la télévision. Pauline regarde des photos. Again, it's singular, so it's not going to be ENT, right? It's going to be elle regarde. Il regarde. Il regarde. Elle porte. So there's that verb porter that we like so much, talking about wearing clothes. Elle porte une robe verte.
Elle porte une robe verte. Elle porte une robe verte.
Same pronunciation, different spelling, because it's plural. Les étudiants arrivent. All right, so we'll click on valider to see how we did. 20 out of 20, awesome. I guess I can teach French. So I hope you got something like 10 out of 20. Maybe even got 16 or 20 out of 20. It's good practice. Once you've completed that activity, then you're going to be doing this activity where I've given you an example of Madame Chouilla. Chouilla, chouilla is a little. It's from Arabic, and it's become a French word as well. It's borrowed from the Arabic, chouilla, so it's Miss Little. I don't know, I just came up with it, okay? Le matin, so in the morning, Madame Chouilla mange un croissant. À midi, elle travaille au bureau. Après le travail, elle danse un peu. So here I picked 3 different verbs, manger, travailler, danser, to talk about what Madame Chouilla does in the morning, at noon, and after work. And I've asked you to do the same for you, okay? In the morning, I, and so you'll pick one verb. In the afternoon, I, and then a different ER verbs. And then après les classes, after class, I, and then a different ER verb, all right? So please make sure to complete that by the end of the day tomorrow. Just to practice conjugation. All right, you want to use 3 different ER verbs. Okay, so les verbes en français. So we've spent the past couple weeks really conjugating ER verbs. All right, ER verbs are super common in French. And verb conjugation is an essential part of the French language. The same can be said of Spanish, German, and many other languages. So verb conjugation is basically when you say he does, she is doing, I do, we do, right? So it's changing the verb to fit the subject. It's changing the verb to fit the person who's doing the thing. This is really important to most languages. There are some languages, in Mandarin Chinese, for example, you don't conjugate the verb. You have a lot of trouble adding, participes and stuff. You have to add little things on the end to indicate, oh, well, when something happened, or if you're in the process of doing it, for example. So if you're looking to avoid conjugating verbs, I'd recommend Mandarin Chinese. but for French, you do have to learn how to conjugate them. And it's not something that I'm asking you to master right now, but I'm kind of trying to get you in the process of recognizing this pattern so you can get better and better at it. And it can feel tedious, and sometimes you might even feel frustrated learning how to conjugate verbs in French. But I want to really let you know this is an important part of learning the language. And if you kind of invest the time early on, it can really serve you later on. So take heart. If you can come to terms with this pattern of changing the verb based on whether it's je, tu, nous, vous, etc. If you can come to terms with that and start seeing that as a pattern and kind of getting more familiar with it and develop strategies, right? So some of these strategies might be doing activities like the one I just gave you. Some of these strategies might be doing Quizlets as kind of flashcards, maybe writing them down, maybe thinking of, you could do a drawing or something because verbs are often actions, right? So they're often things that you can are really kind of animated. If you can develop these strategies, it'll carry you throughout your learning of the language, and it'll help you. It'll really help you as you learn this language. So for example, if you master this pattern of ER verb conjugations, which I'm not asking you to do, I'm just introducing you to it and I'm asking you to get familiar with it. If you master this pattern with porter, for example, you gain access to all kinds of verbs, far more than the list I've shown you, right? I've shown you this list several times of the more common ones, but I'm gonna show you in a moment a list of all the verbs, all the ER verbs in French, and it's a lot bigger than even I expected. And this is true for other verbs in French. So in French, ER verbs is the biggest category. So if you can conjugate ER verbs, you can conjugate a lot of other verbs. There are a couple other categories, RE verbs and IR verbs that we'll learn later this semester. And those are patterns that'll help you with another big chunk of French verbs. But some of them you just have to kind of memorize. So in your activity packet, I put être and avoir, and there are a couple other verbs like that, where it's like, you just kind of got to memorize it. It doesn't really follow a pattern. So here I did this quick video for you, just to show you. Hopefully it'll load. All right, so in French, these verbs are really, really common, and I want to just show you really quickly. This is a website that talks about verb conjugation, and they've got a really great list, and I wanted to share this list with you. So starting with A, these are all ER verbs. All right, so now we're at C. Here we are at the letter E. Finally, the letter P. And we're almost at the end. There we go. All right. These are all ER verbs. Some of them are pretty rare, but just to give you an idea of just how frequent these verbs are, it's really, really, really common. Okay, so I really wanted to just give you that as an example of ER verbs. If you master this pattern by the end of the semester, then moving forward after the semester, you'll have a really, really great tool that you can use. So even if you see a verb like aberrer, who knows what that means? You'll still know how to conjugate it. You'll know how to use it. Okay, so yeah. So this is one of the things that can frustrate people with the French language is verb conjugation. But what I want to do is I want to encourage you to approach it as a tool. Like, oh, if I can get a good strategy for this, that'll really serve me. It'll become a powerful tool for later on in the language. All right. So in your Unit 2 activity packet, I've included the verbs mettre, être, and avoir. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share with you the conjugation of these verbs. And what I'd ask is for you to take a screen cap once I've shown you the conjugation so that you can include it in the packet. I'll be asking you to turn in the unit packet. I think I set it for next Monday. And what I'd like you to do is to complete the packet, to turn it in and to get credit for it for sure. But then so that you have these verbs to refer back to, right? So you can always go back and look like, oh, I need to remember how to conjugate mettre. I need to conjugate être or avoir. It can become like your own personal notes. My cat is being naughty. Okay, so mettre is a really helpful verb because it's used a lot by itself, but it's also part of a lot of other verbs. And so I put it in this unit because quand il fait frais, Soraya met un pull. You're putting something on, right? But it can mean a lot of other things too. So it can be part of commettre, permettre, soumettre, remettre, transmettre, admettre, etc. There are even more, I think. Right? But these are all verbs that use the same conjugation. They just add something in the beginning of the word to mean a different thing. So again, it's kind of similar to these ER verbs where if you unlock the pattern of this verb, you unlock all these other verbs too. So again, je mets, tu mets, elle met, nous mettons, vous mettez, elles mettent. Same thing with pronunciation where you're not pronouncing the ENT. All right, so go ahead and please take a screen cap of this. And that way you can use it for your activity packet. Okay. I've also included être and avoir in the activity packet. And this is not something that we're going to spend a lot of time learning, right? This is something that we'll come back to towards the end of the semester, I think. But what I'd like you to do is to start getting familiar with these verbs and getting familiar with this pattern of conjugation where you're just going through and okay, I am, you are, she is, we are, y'all are, they are, right? Where it's like, okay, you're just learning how to conjugate and understanding that there is this pattern in French. So as you can imagine, to be is a really common verb. So je suis, tu es, elle est. Nous sommes, vous êtes, elles sont. All right, and here are some expressions with être. Je suis d'accord, I agree. Je suis en retard, I'm late. Je suis en avance, I'm early. Je suis en vacances, I'm on vacation, right? There are a few expressions with être, but most importantly, it's a really good verb just to know, right? If you're talking about your feelings, you're gonna wanna use être. If you're talking about your job and your kind of title, you're gonna wanna use être. Oh my goodness, time flew. Please take a screenshot of this. I wanted to end early today. Oh man, I'm sorry. Well, avoir is another great verb to have in your pocket. And again, this is not something I'm asking you to memorize. This is just something I want to expose you to. So you've seen it, and then later on we can keep working with it and building on it, and then eventually you can master it, okay? Avoir is a really helpful verb because it's to have. You're going to want to use that, but there's a ton of expressions with avoir. To be hot, to be cold, to have pain, to be correct, to be wrong, to need, to want, to be thirsty, to be hungry. Avoir. J'ai, tu as, elle a, nous avons, vous avez, elles ont. Please take a screen cap of this. Okay, and just another, to continue those expressions, avoir tort, to be wrong, avoir peur, to be afraid. And we'll really visit these expressions properly a little later. Avoir honte, to be ashamed, avoir envie de, to desire, all right? Avoir faim, to be hungry. Maybe you're getting hungry, it's almost lunchtime. Okay, so for tomorrow, please complete that activity packet for Unit 2 and complete the verb ER Unit 1. Tomorrow, we'll begin Unit 3. I'll introduce you to it and we'll talk a little bit about what we're going to be looking at. I had hoped to end early today, and I apologize for not ending early. But I'll go ahead and for the recording, I'll say au revoir, but I'll stick around if you have questions.